I'm Ashley, and this is my cultural presentation on Uganda. Yes, I picked an entire country because the few things that I want to talk about affect the whole country. So Uganda is a landlocked African country. Its predominant language is English, but they also have Swahili and Lugandan, but there are over 40 living languages in there. There's also 30 other languages that they don't call them living languages, but altogether what I found is that there's over 70 spoken languages in Uganda. The predominant religions in Uganda is Christianity, Islam, and the rest is indigenous beliefs. The population is sitting at 48.66 as of 2024. 2024, yes. The generalized cultural analysis, gender roles and norms are very traditional. Same-sex marriage is punishable by death. They are considered a collective society. Um, they they share their history and ancestry, and they tell stories through storytelling and singing. Most people are multilingual. Not only do they speak English and another Ugandan language, but they usually can speak something like French or Russian, Swahili. There's a lot of languages that they speak. English is the professional language, it's the business language, but where area they reside in Uganda decides which Ugandan language they speak. For instance, in Kampala, they speak Lugandan. So the history of Uganda is in 1884. A whole bunch of these not English, I'm sorry, a whole bunch of Europeans got together and decided how they were going to own Africa without speaking to anybody in Africa. They just all showed up in these different parts and said, "You're mine." In 1888, they went under British control. 1921, they were granted legislative council, which means that they had the ability to make their own laws, but no African was allowed to sit in that council until 1945. This is why I have provided this picture of Maui. What can we say? You're welcome. In 1962, they finally became an independent country. After 1962, their history's kind of repeated itself. Unfortunately, they've had a lot of corruption, a lot of coups, a lot of takeovers internally. No one externally has truly tried to do anything with Uganda. Uganda's just been in a lot of internal conflict since then. So the first cultural thing I would like to talk about is what I call the miracle of twins. So Or and Nuala say that in the culture in Uganda, the birth of twins is always a cause of joy and anxiety, a great deal of excitement as well as concern. More so if it happens to be identical twins. They regard a special gift from the ancestors. There's a lot of superstition surrounding twins, and I know that this isn't specific to Uganda, but I hadn't really researched it. I had always just heard about things like this. But in Uganda, there is so much that goes into twins. If a doula finds that a mother is pregnant or suspects that a mother is pregnant with twins, she doesn't tell them. She will inform the witch doctors, she will inform others, and that's when the ritual practice starts, is while the mother is still pregnant. There's an entire ritual that's performed when she gives birth, the cutting of the cords, the naming of the babies. I mean, it not only that, it's not just that, it also there's a ritual when they hit puberty, there's a ritual when they get married, there's a ritual when they die. There's so much surrounding twins in Uganda, it is unbelievable. But it's because they are seen as somewhat godlike. And then in other aspects of Ugandan culture, for some, it's one will be very good and one will be evil. And these rituals are required in order to make the one who could be evil not be evil. They just have this power about them. It's actually quite interesting to look at, a lot to talk about, but a very interesting cultural practice. My ethical assessment, although I personally view it as excessive and intensive, I can't say that the ritual itself is unethical in any way, shape, or form. Um, they it rarely involves harming, um, and if it usually the harm is unintentional. The most unfortunate aspect is if a twin is discovered to have not gone through these ritualistic practices. because the parents were Christian or Islam, or I'm sorry, Muslim, then it can bring in a lot of relational issues with the community. They could be shunned, they could be feared. They get a stigma around them because they had not gone through the ritual. So they might be godlike, they might be the evil one in some people's eyes. The next one I'd like to talk about is witchcraft. Um, this is a very broad topic, but it's something that isn't prevalent in Western culture, which I also find very interesting. Topic for a different day. But even though Uganda is heavily Christian and they have a lot of um, Muslim influence, the witchcraft still has a very tight hold on a lot of people there. It scares a lot of people, even the Christians, even the Muslims. It's something that they fear because it is something that is very real there. The witches and the witch doctors do serve the community. I had a very hard time finding something that shows that they don't always just hurt. But my wife, who was a missionary in Uganda way back when, topic for a different day, said that there were witch doctors there who were good, who did things only to help the community, who were helping with illnesses and sicknesses. They never were there to harm people. So it does exist. I know that. But they also conjure a lot of fear because they do kill people, not just to create concoctions and things for their clients, but also they kill people who hurt their business. It's an unfortunate reality. Like it says in cultural context, though, Khan and Yusuf assert that culture's perspective on the cosmos reflects its philosophy about its people's relationship with the supernatural and spiritual world. And that's exactly what we're seeing. My ethical assessment is if it involves human ritual sacrifices or the mutilation of human, it's clearly unethical. Um, yes, obviously, culturally they're saying it ethical, but it violates human rights. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. As Auguste says, the African sorcery and magic industry attracts women just as it attracts men. Women serve as witch doctors, sorcerers, or ritualists who use human body parts or fluids to prepare concoctions or charms for their clients. You cannot make that ethical anymore. Yes, things like that used to be just the way things were. Maybe not necessarily, maybe they've always been unethical, but they're things that in today's society, in today's culture, we cannot turn a blind eye. I mean, to the fact that they know that it's wrong because they don't want to get caught doing it. They know that they are in trouble if they do it. Even if they think it's right, they know it's wrong on some level. But I do think if witchcraft is done without harming people in any way, it only enters a gray area because a lot of them still perform animal sacrifice. That is definitely a cultural thing. I mean, we don't eat dogs here, for instance. We don't eat guinea pigs. We don't eat horses, but there's definitely other cultures who do. I tried guinea pig while I was in Peru, for instance. Definite gray area for some people. The most important takeaways for me was that Uganda has more than 70 languages. A different language means a different culture. There's something culturally different. It might be extremely similar to one, but there's something very different about it. The other thing is, even though they are a colonized country, which back in, and I didn't reference this, but because I referenced it in my last assignment, is colonized countries tend to be more individualistic. But Uganda is not. It has more of a collective mindset. This is just my own input, but I think that has to do with its newness of being an independent country again. And the fact that it has had so much internal struggle, it hasn't really had an opportunity to become more individualistic because they've had to lean into each other so much, or because they're against each other. There is unfortunately a lot of tribalism that still exists in Uganda. Um, and although Christianity and Islam are dominant religions, the old religions are still very much uh, alive and prevalent. Um, so I find it interesting that culture can those the old cultures are not necessarily assimilating with religion. Old cultural practices, I should say, are not necessarily assimilating with Christianity and Islamic values. They're still saying they're very much alive. Um, how does this improve my intercultural competency? Well, first off, knowing more about any culture helps understand other people. So just by me doing this work and reading and learning is me understanding some of these other things about cultures. Also, reading these articles didn't just help me get a better understanding of Uganda, but Africa as a whole, because they use the neighboring countries to Uganda as for examples as well, because they're going through a lot of the same struggles because of colonization. Anyways, um, and so I got to learn a lot more about the struggles of these other countries as well. The other thing is how I think it helps my intercultural competency. It may be cross-cultural, but I do know a lot of missionaries. I have a very different viewpoint about missionaries now than I did 3, 4, 5 years ago. But that's besides the point. A lot of missionary children struggle with culture because they've grown up in different parts of the world. They might be American by birth, but their culture does not necessarily ring with American culture anymore because they've been to places like Uganda. And I know several people who spent a lot of time in Uganda, years and years and years. And so me learning this has helped me be able to understand them and some of what they do now as well. The challenges for this article for me was one, making this video short enough for you and this presentation short enough, but also there are so many aspects to Ugandan culture that it's almost like generalizing American culture and saying because New York is like this, it means Montana's like this. When we know, because we live here in the United States, that New York culture is very different from Montanan culture. Montana is even more individualistic than New York is. New York is very much more collective. Excuse me. But I found so much interest in this country that I had to do this because it also gave me an insight into what my wife went through. My wife was there in 2016 when they had war/conflict after the election, and bodies were dropped off at an orphanage. Children were being thrown over fences, and I was just so curious about the things that my wife has talked about that I had to know. This is my cultural presentation on Uganda. Thank you for being here today.